In 2026, Americans over the age of 75 are the fastest growing group in the entire United States workforce. Not the fastest growing group of retirees, the fastest growing group of workers, people who, by every historical measure, should have stopped working 2 decades ago are clocking in instead of checking out. In 1985, the labour force participation rate for Americans 65 and older hit a historic low of just under 11%. 4 decades later, that number has more than doubled, and it keeps climbing every year. For years, the easy explanation was laziness. Younger generations don't want to grind anymore. Older generations just didn't plan. Everyone blames the person, never the plumbing. But look closer, and that story falls apart fast. The people staying in the workforce past 65, past 70, even past 80, aren't doing it for fulfillment. According to the Bureau of Labour Statistics, most are doing it because Social Security alone no longer covers the gap between what they earn and what they owe. So here's the question this video actually answers. If retirement used to be a promise every American could count on, what broke it? The answer isn't one villain, it's a chain of decisions made decades ago, each one quietly shifting the risk of growing old off institutions and onto individuals who were never warned that it was happening. To understand what broke, you have to see what used to work. For most of the 20th century, retirement in America wasn't something you built yourself. It was something your employer built for you. The defined benefit pension was the backbone of that promise. Work for a company for 20, 30, 40 years, and in exchange, you receive a fixed monthly check for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live, no matter what the market does. The company carried the risk. The retiree carried none of it. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers in America had one of these pensions. Entire industries were built around the expectation that a career meant a destination, and the destination was a guaranteed income you couldn't outlive. Social Security was designed to sit underneath that pension, not to replace it. It was a floor, not a foundation. Planners still describe the original design as a 3-legged stool: pension, personal savings, and Social Security combined, each leg doing part of the work so no single leg had to carry the whole weight. This wasn't charity. Companies offered pensions because loyalty was cheaper to buy with a future promise than with higher wages today. Workers accepted lower pay in their 30s in exchange for security in their 60s. It was a trade, and for decades both sides kept their end of it. By the late 1970s, this system covered the majority of American industrial and union workers. Auto plants, steel mills, and airlines all built recruitment around it. It's the reason your grandparents could retire at 65 with a gold watch and a check that never stopped coming. It's also the reason so many people today still assume that's simply how retirement works, even though almost none of them have access to it anymore. If you're new here, this channel breaks down exactly how systems like this quietly fall apart. Hit subscribe now, because the next part is where it all started to crack. For a while, this arrangement looked unbreakable. Pension funds grew across the 1950s and 1960s, alongside a booming post-war economy. Union density was high. Employers who wanted to compete for skilled workers had to offer a pension, or lose their best people to a competitor who did. Even the federal government reinforced the system. In 1974, Congress passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, which set minimum funding standards for private pension plans. That same year, Congress created the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, an entire federal agency whose only job was ensuring pensions against employer failure. The message to workers was simple: your future income is protected by law, and if your employer collapses, the government steps in behind them. By 1978, defined benefit pensions weren't just common. They were the default expectation for anyone with a stable full-time job. Nobody was asking whether their employer would fund their retirement. The only question was how generous it would be. That confidence turned out to be the most expensive assumption of the entire century. Buried inside a routine piece of tax legislation that same year, a single provision was about to hand corporate America a legal way out of that promise. Nobody in Congress flagged it as historic. No headline called it a turning point. It sat quietly in the tax code for 2 years before anyone realised what it actually allowed employers to do. Keep that in mind, because it matters later. What started as a narrow technical fix for how employees deferred bonus income would end up dismantling the pension system entirely, and it happened so gradually that most Americans didn't notice until their own pension was already gone. The provision was Section 401k of the Revenue Act of 1978, signed into law under President Jimmy Carter. It was written to let employees defer a portion of bonuses and stock compensation into a tax-advantaged account. On its own, it wasn't designed to touch pensions at all. Then, in 1981, a benefits consultant named Ted Benner read the provision differently. Benner, working for a Pennsylvania firm called the Johnson Companies, realized the language could apply to regular salary, not just bonuses. He built the first true 401k plan around that interpretation, and the IRS let it stand. What Benner created solved an immediate problem for employers. Pensions were becoming expensive to fund as workers lived longer, and interest rates shifted. A 401k lets a company hand employees a tax-advantaged account, match a portion of their contributions, and walk away from decades of guaranteed future liability. The investment risk, the market risk, the longevity risk, all of it moved from the company's balance sheet onto the employee's shoulders. Congress kept widening that door. The Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982 and the Tax Reform Act of 1986 both reduced the tax incentives for companies to keep funding defined benefit pensions at all. By the 1990s, even blue-chip employers were closing the door behind them. General Electric and IBM both eventually froze their pension plans to new employees, joining a wave of household name companies making the same calculation. The numbers tell a different story than intent alone. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers had a defined benefit pension. Today, that figure sits under 15%. Meanwhile, 401k participation climbed from about 8% of workers in 1980 to over half the workforce now. Benner himself has never defended what his creation became. He has publicly called it a monster that should be blown up, citing the complexity, the fee structures, and outcomes far worse than what pensions used to deliver. This wasn't a conspiracy. It was a slow, rational series of individual choices, each one making sense on its own, each one shifting a little more risk downstream, but the effect was the same as if it had been planned from the start. An entire generation of workers was quietly moved from a system that guaranteed an outcome to a system that only guaranteed a tax break. On paper, this looked like a win for workers. More control, more flexibility, portable accounts that you could carry from job to job instead of being locked into one employer for 30 years. It wasn't. Pensions didn't require financial literacy. A worker didn't need to understand equity markets, bond duration, or sequence of returns risk to receive their monthly check. A 401k requires exactly that knowledge, handed to millions of people with no training in how to use it. According to Vanguard's How America Saves 2026 report, covering 4.6 million accounts through the end of 2025, the average 401k balance in America is $167,970. The median, the number that reflects what a typical person actually has, is just $44,115. That gap between average and median is the whole story in two numbers. A small group of high earners with large balances pulls the average up. Most people are nowhere near it. There's a design flaw hiding underneath those figures. Workers who are automatically enrolled in a 401k save at rates above 85% because the default does the work for them. Workers who have to open a retirement account on their own, without automatic enrollment, participate at rates below 15% in the very same income brackets. The system was never rigged against effort. It was rigged around a single checkbox, and tens of millions of people simply never had it checked for them. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances found something harder to look at directly. As of 2025, 29% of American non-retirees have no retirement savings of any kind. Not a small balance, none. This is where the story gets stranger, because the shortfall isn't evenly spread by age either. Middle-class households not yet retired have saved a median of just $67,000 across every retirement account they own, according to 2025 research from the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. $67,000 has to fund a retirement that could last 25 years or more. That math doesn't work on its own. And it gets worse once you add in the one expense every retirement plan underestimates, the one nobody bills you for until you're already too old to go back and make up the difference. The bigger problem wasn't the size of anyone's 401k on its own. It was what retirees actually needed that account to cover once Social Security alone stopped being enough. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 is $2,071 a month. According to research from Sophie Bank, the typical single retiree's baseline monthly spending runs $4,641 before healthcare, before housing repairs, before a single unplanned expense. That's a monthly shortfall of over $2,500 for anyone relying on Social Security as their main income. Multiply that gap across a year, and retirees leaning on savings to close it need somewhere between $10,000 and $17,000 in additional income annually just to stay even, according to a 2026 analysis of Federal Reserve and Vanguard data. A 2024 AARP survey found that 20% of Americans aged 50 and older have no retirement savings at all, and 70% worry prices will keep rising faster than their income. Current retirees are the clearest evidence of how badly the target and the reality have drifted apart. Retirees surveyed in 2026 believe the average person now needs $823,800 saved to retire comfortably, up from $580,310 just 1 year earlier. Yet those same retirees report having an average of only $288,700 actually saved, barely a third of what they believe is required, and $20,000 less than what retirees averaged the year before. Not only did savings fall short, wages for most workers barely kept pace with the cost of living during the exact decades people were supposed to be closing that gap. Someone in their 50s today started their career in the early 1990s, watched 2 major recessions eat into their investments, and spent their prime earning years absorbing rent, healthcare, and tuition costs that outpaced inflation almost every year. Over half of today's retirees say they lived paycheck to paycheck before they ever stopped working. So what was actually happening while people believed they were on track? They were falling behind a target moving faster than their paychecks, using a savings tool that was never designed to replace a guaranteed income in the first place. And that's before you even get to the expense that quietly outgrows every retirement budget built around it. Healthcare is where retirement plans go to die. According to Fidelity's 2025 retiree healthcare cost estimate, a single person retiring at 65 today can expect to spend $172,500 out of pocket on healthcare throughout retirement. For a couple, that figure rises to $345,000. Neither number includes long-term care. Not only is that number enormous, it's also rising faster than almost every other cost retirees face. Fidelity's first estimate back in 2002 was just $80,000. The cost has more than doubled in just over 2 decades, and it keeps climbing every year. Medicare doesn't even begin until age 65. According to Fidelity, the average American actually retires at 62 or 63, which means most people face a 2 to 3 year gap, paying full price for private coverage before Medicare eligibility starts at all. And Medicare, once it does start, isn't free. The standard Part B premium is $202.90 a month in 2026, with an annual deductible of $283, and higher earners can be charged surcharges pushing that monthly premium as high as $689.90. Fidelity advisor Kerry Bieber puts it plainly: retirement healthcare planning is about each individual and their personal health situation, not a one-size-fits-all number, and for most people, that situation costs more than they've budgeted. Part of the reason is the preparation nobody talks about. Only 15% of Americans aged 55 to 64 even have a health savings account, the one tool built specifically to cover these costs tax-free. More than half of that small group don't realize it can double as a retirement savings vehicle in the first place. Long-term care makes the math even harder. An individual who reaches 65 has roughly a 70% chance of needing some form of long-term care before they die, whether that's a home health aide, assisted living, or a full nursing facility. Those costs run into 5 and 6 figures annually, and Medicare barely touches any of them. That's 2 mistakes compounding at once. A savings system that was never built to guarantee income is colliding with a healthcare bill growing faster than wages, savings, or social security cost of living adjustments ever could. And just as that gap widens for millions of Americans approaching retirement, the one backstop the entire system still depends on is running out of time of its own. Here's the backstop everyone assumes will always be there. Social Security's retirement trust fund is running out of money, not someday, not eventually. According to the 2026 Trustees report released this June, the fund will be depleted in the fourth quarter of 2032. That's 6 years away. When it happens, benefits don't disappear, but they get cut automatically by law, down to 78% of what's promised. That's a 22% cut to monthly checks for tens of millions of retirees who built their retirement math around the full amount. If Congress combines Social Security's 2 trust funds, the deadline stretches to 2034, and the cut shrinks to 17%. Still a cut, still automatic, still coming unless lawmakers act before the money runs out. The demographic math behind that shortfall is brutal in its simplicity. In 1965, 4 workers were paying into Social Security for every 1 person collecting benefits. Today, that ratio has dropped below 3 to 1. Projections put it at 2.5 to 1 by the middle of this century. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the program faces cash deficits totaling $3.8 trillion over just the next 10 years alone. Gopisha Gowda, director of the Retirement Security Project at the Brookings Institution, has pointed out that 20 years ago, lawmakers had room for gradual reform. Now the options are narrower and the timeline is shorter. This is the reckoning. Not a single company is collapsing. Not one bad decision. An entire generation of Americans is discovering, all at once, that the pension disappeared, the 401k never replaced it, healthcare costs exploded on top of both, and the one guaranteed program left standing is now on a 6-year countdown of its own. That's why the labour force participation rate for Americans 65 to 74 is projected at 30.2% in 2026, nearly double what it was in 1996. That's why workers 75 and older are now the fastest growing age group in the entire American workforce, and why the Bureau of Labor Statistics expects older Americans to account for the majority of all labour force growth over the next several years. Rising costs are on my mind, and they're just going to go higher, one retiree told CBS News this year, describing exactly why she went back to work instead of staying retired. It was never laziness, it was arithmetic. So what's the real reason no one wants to retire anymore? It comes down to 3 broken promises stacked one on top of the other. First, the pension disappeared. The guaranteed lifetime income carried by employers for most of the 20th century was quietly replaced by a 401k that shifts every risk onto individual workers, most of whom were never trained to manage it, and, in millions of cases, were never even automatically enrolled in it. Second, healthcare costs exploded faster than wages, savings, or Social Security ever could keep up with. A single retiree now needs $172,500 just for medical expenses, arriving right when their earning years are already over and their income is already fixed. Third, the one backstop everyone assumed would always be there, Social Security itself, is now 6 years from a mandatory benefit cut, with no guarantee Congress will fix it before the deadline arrives. None of this happened because people stopped wanting to work hard, save responsibly, or plan. It happened because the system quietly shifted the entire weight of retirement onto individuals over about 40 years, one reasonable sounding policy at a time, and had never told anyone the old deal was off. Barely a third of working Americans today feel genuinely on track for retirement, and that number has been sliding, not climbing. The people working into their 70s and 80s right now aren't failing at retirement. They're succeeding at survival inside a system that was redesigned without their permission, decades before most of them were even hired. If this is the first time you're hearing the real math behind why retirement broke, there are a lot more of these stories hiding in plain sight, in the economy, in specific companies, in entire countries. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing them.